Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm really excited to have a repeat guest here with me today, Ian Mitchell. Now, he wears many, many hats. We were just talking before we turned on the camera. So, we're going to discuss a lot of things today. We're going to talk about C60. We're going to talk about some cool experiments he's been doing with LilaQ and even his wizard water. So, welcome back, Ian.
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you. And so like where the heck do we even start? What sounds the most exciting to you to talk about right now?
Well, okay, maybe we ought to segue from the last time I was here, and we were
Yep.
talking about quantum. So
Yes.
one of the new experiments that I've been doing, and this one is it's very cool. We haven't publicly released it yet, so this will probably be the first time a lot of people are hearing about it. But I don't think anyone will mind me talking about it. So it's kind of strange. So we've been looking at the new quantum upgrade program that we're doing at Leela. And so, as part of that, we wanted to verify and prove out that, yeah, yes, in fact, the quantum upgrade is working. So, how we did it, it was kind of an interesting experiment we devised to kind of double blind everything. So, I'm the only person who actually knows what is what, but we take cells at the university and we'll set up different plates and put cells on the plates. And then I will take a picture of just three of the six, and then I'll send those to Philip and Roman Hafner in Germany, and they will charge using the quantum upgrade program just three of the plates. Now they don't know how they're numbered, and the professor at the university doesn't know how they're numbered. So I'm the only one who actually has the data knowing which is which. So it's truly double blinded, and then we'll put all of the trays in the incubator and grow them. And then we'll take them out and use a substance called cell titer glow and actually look at it's kind of a luciferase thing where it glows under different circumstances. And in this case, it's when there's an ATP release. So before we actually have them charged, we run the assay and see what they are. And then we do it at half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, and 24 hours. And what has been remarkable to me, and again, it's kind of funny to me because I'm the guy doing the experiment, but when I get the data, it still kind of floors me. 100% of the time, the ATP levels on the charged cells jump. And
Wow.
they've gone from either at level with the other cells to above, or even from below the level to above the level of cellular output. And it always happens within the 2 hour mark. And then they go up and then they kind of normalize back out over the span of a day. But there's such a pronounced jump that it's not a statistical aberration. It's very consistent. And we've done the experiment repeatedly because it was such a strange result that I insisted that we do it multiple times just to really truly vet it and make sure that we had a solid data set. But it's really amazing. I mean, from 10,000 miles away, the cellular output of the ATP is being markedly shifted
Wow.
and 100% efficacious. I mean, it just every single time, which is, I don't know, we've just really kind of started to push into the new bounds of quantum biology, which is great for me because I love that. Because the cool part about science isn't just doing what everybody else has done in rote
Mhm.
memorization. It's kind of nudging forward and pushing the bounds. And a lot of times that means you get results where you're like, this is amazing. How does it work? Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
really that's kind of where we're at with this is it's amazing and it works and it's repeatable, but we don't have the exact mechanism. And I don't, as I always joke with the guys, I don't have a quantumometer, so I can't
Right.
can't actually measure the quantum energy. So I have to measure all these peripheral effects, like the secondary and tertiary effects of like ATP and blood clotting and things like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people they look at something like the LilaQ product, which you're the kind of the scientific officer for that company. You do a
Mhm.
lot of scientific advisory work there, and they're like, "Oh, what's that going to do?" Because I did this cheeky little post on my Insta. It wasn't cheeky, but it was just a fun little post on my Instagram showing the things that I brought to the hospital that were like super weird, like a wand like the nurses are like, what in the heck even is this? I brought my little water structuring wand. I brought my LilaQ quantum block to go in the hospital room, of course, a collection of blue blockers and, just a bunch of stuff that people were just like, what in the world? Um, but I literally had when we were getting to the hospital to have my son, it was a like really quick delivery. It's a miracle we even got to the hospital. But I brought my block out of the bag um, right before I gave birth, and then I had it in the room with me during
Mhm.
the whole time we stayed there. And I only had to stay for 24 hours because it was a hospital I chose that had that policy. Um, but still, I felt, I mean, being in a hospital is just kind of this draining experience for so many reasons: the non-native EMFs, the lighting, just not a healthy environment, which is pretty ironic. And that
Truly.
I really did feel, I really did feel like the block helped
Yeah,
during that
it does.
process.
I mean,
Do
it,
we?
it very definitively does, and that's the thing that's interesting is, I mean, we can prove it in blood tests and serum analyses and cell cultures and things like that. So we know that it works. It's just, I think the more sort of ephemeral thing that you really can't peg down is the vibe, right? And when you're
Right.
giving birth, you want the vibe to be kind of wonderful, not sterile with weird lighting and lots of, as you said, non-native EMFs that are dysregulating things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm sure they probably looked at you and were like, "What the hell?" But I think it's
Yeah.
great, actually.
Yeah, it was kind of like a hospital that was, it was almost an hour away from my house. That's why we almost didn't make it. But I chose that one because it was a compromise between home birth and hospital birth. But they will allow me to leave in 24 hours. Didn't make me get an IV. Didn't push drugs on me. I was gonna have a water birth, but we didn't have time. So they're used to moms being like super weird. But I think I took like the weirdness level up a notch just to
Yeah, I completely get that. Anytime you start talking about anything quantum and affecting things on a quantum level, and I do actually appreciate, how people kind of look at that with a degree of kind of scorn typically, and
Yes.
you know,
Yes,
and
scorn is a good word.
well, they really do, because it sounds just like some buzzword that people, and for the most part, it really is kind of a buzzword that marketing people use, and that's why
Mhm.
we're really kind of hell bent on making sure that everything is documented, tested. We've got a ton of data from the Besa Institute. I'm doing a lot of data at the university where I do work, and it's really important, I think, to vet out those things. There's another product that I'm working with that we've been devising ways to experiment, to conduct experiments so that we can show the validity of the quantum effects on the brain. And to do that, I'm using 19 channel EEGs and things like that, so we can actually show that the states that are elicited from the compounds are the same states that are being elicited from the quantum behaviors that are entrained in different objects. And that's important, right? Because you can look at different neural evoked potentials and things to see correlations between what happens in a person's brainwave states and their energetics there with the actual substance, and then what transpires when they use something that's quantumly entangled to it, and you're trying to pick up just the frequency. So and I just think it's important to do that, because you've got to keep it honest, otherwise it
Mhm.
just becomes one of these buzzwords where everybody starts bandying about quantum, and they really, it's not legitimately doing anything.
Right, exactly. And I'm super cautious about that. I mean, when I say that I do quantum health coaching, people are kind of like looking at me out of the side of one eye, and I'm like, no, it's legitimate stuff. I'm going to tell you to do these little small things that are going to cause a huge, huge difference for you, and implement things like maybe a Lila quantum block, or even just getting sun exposure, doing red light therapy, little things like that, and not even having to do them for hours a day. Quantum is a small, small little thing you're doing for a large effect, right?
Well, one of the things that I always tell people, and this kind of drives it home, I mean, we really are sort of on the forefront of a lot of new technologies, and we're just breaking into it. And it always, the analogy I use is, this is kind of like the landscape scientifically before, pre von Leeuwenhoek, the guy who developed the microscope. If
Mm,
somebody back then had said, no, your disease and your illness, they're all caused by these little bugs that you can't see, and they're floating around your body, they would have been lambasted as being just a complete nutter. And but then you develop the technologies and the tools based on a hypothesis that you're trying to vet out, and you arrive at something, and that's really where we are. We're kind of in that crux where we're just starting to move towards the point where we have enough data saying, yes, this is working in this capacity. So what do we have to find? And frankly, the downside with the quantum things is, I don't actually know that we're ever going to be able to come up with devices. Maybe we will, maybe in 100 or 1,000 years, but I really think, just because of the nature of what we are in terms of an entity, I don't know that we'll actually be able to do something as refined as the things, with which we're actually constructed. It's kind of like the 100-part machine trying to assess the million-part machine. It's
Mhm.
very difficult to make an assessment of something that fine when we are in fact kind of inherently sort of a gross, in the sense of the macro scale, sort of a gross creature.
Yeah, absolutely. So for something like a quantum block, I guess people might want to know, and then maybe we can talk about your water there.
Oh, sure.
Why,
Sorry,
oh no,
slogging it down.
it's okay. I got mine too. I'll be drinking it out here also. Not wizard water, just my own little special concoction. But why in scientific late terms that my people can understand, why do you think that having that block with me at the hospital was something that was helpful or could be helpful?
Because everything functions with field effects, right? So at our core, we're vibrating strings of energy and consciousness, or at least that's my assessment of things, and it's being very very much proven with the data sets that we're getting. But again, I'm making a few jumps in the steps of the logic. So I would say that at our essence, we are consciousness, and then the epiphenomenon of that consciousness is our physicality. And so all of those things are based on forms aggregating and coalescing. Like if you try and touch something, you're not actually touching it, it's electron
Mhm.
cloud repulsion. So the electron cloud in this hand is pushing off of the electron cloud in this hand, and those electron clouds, they're, if you get below the subatomic level, they're all coalesced vibrating patterns of energy. And what happens when you take a quantum block is it modulates the field. Think of it as kind of throwing a stone into a pond, and it propagates a ripple. And if you're right in the water next to where that ripple's propagating, it washes over you and impacts you. And that's kind of the same idea of why bringing something that's emitting a static field that's a beneficial field into your environment, into your local environment, is of great benefit to you.
Got it. Yeah, so we keep the block downstairs, and I actually just for myself bought a little travel block for upstairs that we keep in the
Oh yeah.
bedroom. Yeah,
Yeah,
which I
I have one
love.
of those as well. They're great. So,
Yep.
and a lot of people look at me, but kind of like, what are you doing? But I keep them at the lab. I bring them to the university. I have one at my house. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of hell bent on using it. Well, and I've seen the data. So, despite the fact that it seems weird, I don't really care. I mean, I'm sure it does seem weird, but it works.
Yeah. And what's the most compelling piece of data that you've seen on those technology?
I still think the dark field microscopy showing the blood work, the effects on EMFs, where you can see how dysregulated people's blood cells get.
Yeah.
But just because it's so very visual, right?
Hmm.
Probably the most compelling to me is the ATP stuff, but that's because I'm actually in the university pulling the data, looking at everything, and seeing it firsthand. But really, I think for the average person, it's looking at the blood and going, "Holy cow!" This is obviously messed up, dysregulated. It's forming the little coin rolls where all of the
Hmm.
platelets coagulate and group together, and that's not how they're supposed to be. And then you put a quantum block in proximity, or put on a quantum jacket or something like that, and they all disperse and start flowing properly. Just looking at the real-time blood work of that is compelling. I think we've got all that stuff up on the website, you can peek at it.
Yep. Yep.
And it's, yeah,
Absolutely.
well,
And
it's
I
kind of
mean, you can do the same
incontrovertible.
thing with grounding too, right? Like it's
Yeah,
been, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's one of the things that's critical is people don't really think of like grounding to a lot of people seems
Hmm.
kind of fringe and silly, but it's,
Stupid. Yeah.
yeah, but it's absolutely real because we're built in kind of in this environment. Our entire biological system evolved in an environment where we're bounded between positive and negative fields. And we're sort of the intermediary, and those things flow through us all the time. So if we can dissipate a buildup of detrimental energies in our body, and ionically move things into the ground, it makes a huge difference. Most of your blood doesn't really, it's not the idea that your heart is really so much of a pump as it is
No.
more of a valve, right? Because to actually create the amount of static pressure you'd need to get all of your blood to move the way it does through all of the microvasculature, it would have to have a much larger organ pumping it. But a lot of the movement is really based on ionic flows. The same
Mhm.
thing, if one of the things I used to have my students read was Gerald Pollack's book, The Fourth Phase of Water, because
Yep.
it's really pivotal, because it shows that Um, a lot of the things that we see, like when somebody gets a sprained ankle and it instantly swells, well, you can't get lymph to perfuse there that quickly unless
Right.
it's an ionic function. And that's why a lot of those things are like that, when you're dealing with kind of aqueous solutions, just like blood.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I had Dr. Pollock on my podcast a few months ago, and the more I learn about structured water inside the body and easy
Mhm.
water, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything. It's just one of those topics that you're like, whoa,
Well,
why is no
I
one
think,
talking about this?
well, it's, Gerald Pollack made a point about this, and I was kind of a big fan of his approach to this. People assume because we're always around water that we really understand it, and kind of one of my basic tenets anytime I would teach, and certainly anytime I'm doing research, is the real obstacle to knowledge isn't so much not being able to find or figure something out. It's thinking that you already have, right? It's the assumption that you already have knowledge. You don't create a void to fill. You fill the space, so there isn't a way to put new thought into that zone. So if you kind of eliminate that and keep yourself as sort of an open vessel and go, well, this is what I think, but maybe that's not the entire picture, it makes it much easier to kind of shift the rapidity with which you pick up new knowledge and acquire different constructs. And that's one of the things I love. Like actually with water on the note, the
Yep.
stuff that I'm sucking down right now, normally water has 8 parts per million oxygen. So I've shifted the water that actually we all drink in the laboratory here so that it has 100 parts per million oxygen. And
Wow.
so that's our handy wizard water that we all drink in the lab.
Wow.
And it's great because it shifts your VO2 max, and it instantly, when you drink it, your pulse, if you're wearing a pulse oximeter, your pulse ox either goes to 100 or your pulse rate drops because it decreases the load on your heart. So your cardiovascular system gets a big break because suddenly you're replete with oxygen. So it's
Wow.
great. I mean, I drink it all the time because it makes thought a whole lot easier.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm, like I said, a huge water nerd. We just got a big water system installed in our kitchen. And so I'm always putting intention into everyone's water, and then I'll put it in the quantum block. And, I'm finding new and interesting ways to make my husband scratch his head on a daily basis, essentially. Like,
Yeah, well,
oh,
if you look at like the Emoto Institute and the stuff that they're doing, I
Mhm.
mean, their research is always very cool to look at, and I think they're doing some kind of nifty things. But that's one of the things. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think around the
Yeah.
lab here, I'm always doing things to make all the guys that work with me scratch their head, going, "What do you want?" Because we're
Yeah.
constantly welding up new pressure vessels and containment systems and vortexes and all sorts of different stuff. I mean, the process to get this stuff is kind of ridiculous. And in fact, actually, in the process of coming up with it, I actually blew up my old lab. I literally blew
What?
out. Truly, yeah, I literally did. Yeah, I blew up the wall and the ceiling, and yeah, we had a catastrophic failure in a pressure vessel system, and yeah, it was not the most warm and fuzzy thing. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's a mad scientist just a little bit there.
Yeah, that's what, we actually have t-shirts that, we jokingly have safety third on them. So, it's and people always ask, well, why is safety third? And I said, well, kindness is first and innovation is second. And then, in truth, safety is not. If you want to get really innovative stuff happening, you have a bunch of really bright people who are very driven, and you put them in a place, and you kind of throw caution to the wind, and you do some cool stuff. And actually the process that we ended up with in order to stabilize both oxygen and hydrogen in water, and keep the ppm up in a very stable fashion and overcome the zeta potential, which is a whole nother technical hoopla. It was a trick. Actually, it took a little bit of finagling and one big explosion, but at the end of the day, we figured it out.
So how does this, because this water that I have, it's the spring aqua system. It's got a hydrogen little valve that you pull down to have hydrogen
Mhm.
water. The other valve is structured with minerals in it and purified. So what's the difference between like something like you could get out of like a spring aqua system and your wizard water? I know it's got the um Yes. Just tell
So,
me.
okay, so the basics. So the first round we're doing with the hyperoxygenated water. Another version is going to be the hyperhydrogenated version. So where we
Mhm.
put, extra hydrogen in it, because I can think of probably over 800 different studies
Oh
that are
yeah, with
peer reviewed
hydrogen.
on
That's why I
molecular
bought this
hydrogen.
system, because I
Yeah,
was like,
no,
I'm
it's
sold.
very
I'm totally
legitimate.
sold on hydrogen. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
as am I. So it's difficult to stabilize. There are a
Mhm.
couple of different products that I've seen that I really like. One of my friends, Luke Story, drinks this
Mhm.
hydrogen water stuff like it's going out of style every day, and it's great. I actually I love it, but it's very difficult to stabilize. That's kind of why
Mhm.
when you pop those open, you have to drink them really quickly.
Fast. Yeah.
Yeah, because the hydrogen, dissipates really rapidly
Mhm.
through the water and out into the atmosphere just because of the shift in pressure. And so stabilizing that was kind of a trick. So really the big difference between what you're drinking and what we're doing here in the lab is just the stability factor.
Got
And
it.
that's really it. So, and
Got it.
also the amount, because normally kind of the parts per million of molecular hydrogen that you'd be able to get in your stuff,
Mhm.
would be a fraction of what we're doing. So the peak that I hit with the oxygen was 228 ppm, which is,
Wow.
compared to 8 ppm, pretty radical.
Yeah.
We actually dialed it back because when you drink that, you get a little bit of a buzz really
Oh,
quickly. Yeah,
interesting.
and that wasn't really the intent. The intent was to have clarity and sharp focus and a lot of added energy and shift your VO2 max, not to kind of go woo,
Since
So
I don't drink, I might want to try some of that. It's been a
yeah, well,
minute.
yeah, I'll send you some. It's yeah, I don't drink either, but it's pretty cool stuff, and it really does. It feels great, and especially if you're doing exercise,
Mm.
that's the time you can actually see it the most, is because it decreases the load on your cardiovascular system so much that your output can just go through the roof, and you don't feel it, because you just have all of the resources that you need. And it's cool because there's kind of an interesting cycle time too. So when you first take it, you get a bunch of perfusion just because of the micronized bubbles esophageally. And so your rates go up and your pulse ox as everything is going down, and then it dips down a little bit. And then when it kind of hits your stomach and starts to move through your GI tract and then gets into your bloodstream, the rates go back up. So you get this instant spike up to 100, then it dips down a little bit, and then it goes back to 100, and it stays there for 20 or 30 minutes, which is really very, very cool. And you can feel it. I mean,
Interesting.
it's pretty obvious. Like, the difference between having it and not having it is pronounced enough that you feel it. And I
Wow.
wouldn't recommend, like drinking a gallon of it, because you become bubbly.
Oh
It's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any like, because when we got this system, my husband was like, because he wasn't drinking structured water. I was like manually structuring all the water and doing my thing to it. And so this is his first time really doing any kind of structured water. And he's like peeing a lot the first like few days. He's like, I don't want this water anymore. It's making me pee too much. And I'm like, I think it's because it's kind of displacing
It's It is. It's
the
probably detoxifying the system. So,
exactly.
really, when you have structured water and you take that into your system, it's far easier, because really the water that your body is using is the stuff that's produced through your mitochondria, right? So
Right.
you consume the water, then it's broken down, runs through your mitochondria, and actually becomes the usable water that you can ingest. Which is why deuterium is such a big issue.
Yes.
But that's something we can address at a later date, because the next
I know you
iteration
were
of
talking about doing deuterium depleted water and affordable,
yeah,
and
and
I
that's
was going
that's
to
going to
ask you about
probably
that.
be the second iteration of this, is our new process for deuterium depletion, which I think will probably come to market in August or something like that. But it'll
Oh,
just yeah,
fabulous.
it'll be at the price of normal water instead of
Wow. I'm gonna
yeah.
have a lot of people call. I've still got 2 cases of 5 ppm light water in my basement that I kept from. I did a deuterium depleted water before pregnancy,
Mhm.
so I have 2 cases of that. It was amazing energy. I felt so good doing it, but I'm like, not
Yeah,
during
it's a big
pregnancy,
shift.
probably not good during breastfeeding. Those
No, well,
babies
and
need deuterium.
yeah, that's exactly it. That's what I was going to say, is yeah, they definitely do. And that's the thing, is it's kind of a phasic thing. You have to
Mhm.
put it where it appropriately belongs. So we, people of our age don't really want it, but little kidlets definitely need it to, force the growth rates a little bit. So yeah, I
Exactly.
think that'll be coming probably in August. But this we'll probably launch this at least for people that have subscriptions, just to test it out and get some feedback here in the next month or so. I'm
Yeah,
excited about it. I just
I'm
think it's such
in.
a
Send me
usable
some.
thing. Okay,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, I will. Yeah,
Yeah.
just let
Very
me know what
cool.
you think.
I will. Alexis loves the hydrogen water too. I mean, she, before when we got the system, she would only drink water if I put a tablet in it or if I stirred it to structure it, like or put it under the quantum block. She kind of saw all my rituals. And so she only wants like structured water, hydrogen. Like she's very particular about her water now. I think she just kind of intuitively knows. So she's my little litmus test on everything. Like, let's see how
Yeah,
she
I think
thinks.
that's important. Well,
Yeah.
the structuring, that's one of the things is after we hyperoxygenate it, we restructure it and then, bottle it and or can it. And that's yeah, that stuff is all critical. It's kind of funny that people haven't really snapped to yet. I
Mm-mm.
mean, a lot of people, especially people in health and wellness, we're all kind of manic. Literally almost everybody I know is kind of manic about making
About
sure
their
that
water.
yeah.
I totally am now. Used to be diet. Now I'm like the water. It's the water.
Yeah, well, it is, right? But I mean, if
Yeah.
you had Gerald Pollack on, by
Yeah.
molecular count, we're more than 99% water molecules. So it's
Exactly.
probably important to make sure that that 99% is legit and good and beneficial. So,
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. So got the water topic and I'm going to be trying that out. One other thing I brought to the hospital with me that people thought was like, what is that little bottle she's bringing with her was the C60, because I actually started using it during pregnancy, when you're kind of like, they call it like pregnancy brain,
mhm.
where you're just not really all there and as sharp as you'd like to be. And then let's talk about postpartum, how that's like 10 times worse. Uh, the C60 has been coming in clutch for me.
it
Seriously.
yeah, it really is actually, especially postpartum. That's I
Yeah. The
think
neural
that's
formula is the one I'm
yeah.
using, and I can't go without it.
Well, so that's kind of an interesting thing. So that's all the carbon 60 so the carbon 60 is just 60 carbon atoms clustered together in a soccer ball, and then I bind it to a lipid so that it can actually be taken into the cells through the cell membranes. And so what happens there is you get this huge uptick. So with the neural formula, it's bound to caprylic acid, right, which is the C8, the octanoic acid. It's the carbonate chain of a medium chain triglyceride. So when you ingest that, it breaks down and goes directly to your liver, forms ketone bodies, and those ketone bodies translocate to your brain. And because your brain can actually use ketones as fuel. And so it was kind of the handy delivery method to get the nanoparticles to move to the brain. And so what happens is they go to the brain, they go into the cells there, and they end up in the mitochondrial membrane, and they buffer oxidative stress. So the outcropping of that is without actually adding anything in like NMN or any other NAD precursor, you get a boost of about 18 to 58.3% ATP output, which is huge. And then, so that's right out of the gate, just knocking out oxidative stress load in the electron transport chain. Then the second thing I did was to add in NMN and resveratrol
Mhm.
and, kind of take this balanced approach to putting an NAD precursor. And my favorite one is NMN. I think it actually works the best. And so when that goes in, then you're actually upregulating another one of the complexes in the electron transport chain. And then it's got CoQ10, PQQ.
Mhm.
And so all of those things, I was trying to isolate the different points on the electron transport chain to upregulate everything. So I was using the C60 to block system loss and then the NAD precursors to upregulate and also the coenzymes to do the same thing. And so you end up with a much more robust energy profile. So your brain suddenly has a surplus of energy. And then I put in enzymes, proteolytic enzymes specifically, that would pass the blood-brain barrier to go in and kind of nibble out little proteins and plaques like tau proteins and beta amyloid plaques that build up over time. So just
Mm.
throughout everybody's lifetime, you're going to aggregate plaques and proteins in your brain, and those kind of dull performance. So when you get a little boost in there so that your glymphatic system, which is the subset of the lymphatic system that's tasked with cleaning your brain using interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid at night while you sleep, gets a little bit of an additional kind of boost, because when the proteins and plaques are stuck together, they literally are very sticky, and so your glymphatic system is just using pressure to wash things. But if the particles are broken apart and smaller and free floating, it's more easily perfused out and gets into your lymph system and can be excreted. So you're literally making it easier to clean your brain. And
Mm.
so over time, the more you do that, the more effectively things function because you have fewer plaques built up in your brain. And so
Ah.
the combination of all of those things, it makes the energy profile that you have, neuronal potential for, just much more robust. And so you're able to think more clearly, and
Mm.
your mood seems stabilized. And I gave it to my youngest son when he was kind of hitting the grumbly teen years, because it made a huge difference, because the way the brain forms, and in people, kind of those years are a little strange morphologically.
Mhm.
There are a lot of changes and things shift, and it's a little weird. But I noticed that when he would have the extra energy, he was very balanced, and it helped a lot. And myself, just because of the kind of the strenuous stuff that I try and keep myself doing mentally, it makes a difference,
Mm.
substantial difference. I mean, really, with that, I developed it for people specifically with Alzheimer's. That was the intent of that,
Yes.
was to do that, to benefit those guys, and help that and negate it. But if you don't have some massive cognitive deficit, then the outcroppings of all those things grouped together is this just really ridiculous energetic profile in your noggin, and you can just hum through stuff. I mean, you know it, you felt it.
Mhm.
That's
Oh yeah.
it's it's very different. That's why I do it every day, is
Yeah.
scratching my own itch.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're going through this fun little thing. My son's developing, I think, ahead of babies his age, and and so he's about 3.5 months. But we're going through the thing I think is called the 4-month sleep regression. So that entails a lot of waking up, and then sometimes we don't want to go back to sleep. We just want to talk, and it's real cute. But I'm also 43, so it's like,
Yeah.
oh, so the first thing I do in the mornings when I do get up is, obviously my sunlight routine, my hydration routine, but then pop some C60, the neural formula, and I can
Yeah.
literally feel after I take that, like, okay, I'm not going to totally crash and die today. And I'm not drinking caffeine either. I'm staying away
Yeah.
from that
Now,
also.
question for you. Are you taking the Olympic formula as well?
I'm not. I've just been taking the neural formula. Do you
Okay,
think I
you
need the
should.
Olympic?
Yeah, I will send you some of the Olympic. You should definitely
Okay.
take that as well. And the rationale for that is your body is an overall system, right? So
Hmm.
even if you're upregulating the energetics in your brain, if your body is depleted, then
Hmm.
you're going to lose some of that benefit, because physically you're always trying to reach a kind of the most effective homeostasis. And so some of those particles are going to be moved elsewhere and shuttled to the areas where you need them. But if you
Mm.
take the Olympic, that was actually designed to go through the rest of your system. So
So
it'll,
my back that's killing me.
yeah, and it decreases the cytokine response pretty
Mm.
profoundly. So it'll take a lot of swelling and things out systemically. So it's actually it's
Nice.
phenomenally good for people with arthritis.
Ah,
But yeah, I mean, I made it for athletes to really bump them forward. Like a lot of the top CrossFit athletes in the world are using it right now with
wow.
ridiculous results. It's really cool to see the things those guys are doing, because they're so good with their metrics and tracking everything, that you can see a profound shift when they weren't taking it to when they were taking it, and get really clean differences in the output that they can do with their musculoskeletal system. Like, just numbers that seem ridiculous to me, but it's consistent.
Amazing
But for the average person who isn't some super competitive athlete,
athlete. Yeah.
you've just got a lot more energy. And when systemic inflammatory responses drop, you feel better. Everything
Yeah.
just functions. I mean, I would never recommend people taking NSAIDs, but it's kind of
Hmm.
like the all natural version of getting an NSAID consistently.
Okay.
So it just yeah, I definitely would recommend that.
And you can do neural and Olympic together,
Yeah,
right?
I actually do them. And yeah, what I do is and this is, I'm a much bigger guy than most people. So I do a tablespoon of Olympic and then two
Hmm.
teaspoons of Neural. So
Okay.
what is the wizard dose of Olympic? But again, I'm probably twice as heavy as you are. So
Okay.
for you, I just say 2 teaspoons and 1 teaspoon, or 2 teaspoons and 2 teaspoons. And that's
Got it.
plenty. Yeah.
Okay.
And
I'm gonna
you'll
try
notice a
that.
difference. I actually, follow up with me and let me know. I would be really curious to hear your feedback.
Oh, well, yeah, I've kind of got away from taking a ton of supplements pre-pregnancy because I just was taking so many of them that I didn't feel like they were really doing any good. And focused more on like grounding and sunlight and red light therapy and, just the more natural aspects. But during pregnancy, I added the C60 back in. And then postpartum, I've been doing C60. And I've also been microdosing a little bit of methylene blue, also just making sure I don't overdo that one and definitely not get pregnant again while doing that. But that's been another one that's been helping also, just
I
like
actually,
not feeling.
I did methylene blue yesterday,
Yeah.
so that's yeah. It's a
Yeah.
good modality. Both are very good. It will C60 and methylene blue are both very good and potent electron donors and acceptors, so they work really well. I typically just do the C60, but yesterday I had a hankering, so I zinged myself and turned my tongue blue. So
Yeah, I've been zinging myself little bits here and there just with the sleep deprivation. I'm like, okay, how am I going to function as a human being today? And that has been very helpful, just to do a little dose, not a full dose. And if you're breastfeeding, do your own research, and nothing on this podcast is medical advice, just throwing that out there too.
yeah, well, for you specifically, what might be more beneficial, just because of understanding what the kind of stress that you're under right now with
Hmm.
breastfeeding and everything that you're doing, you might want to split up the dose and do just do a teaspoon of the Olympic and the Neural in the morning
Hmm.
together, and then do another teaspoon before bed.
Oh,
And
okay.
yeah, or maybe not right before bed, but 2 hours or so
Around
before
there.
bed. That way, it'll just kind of knock out inflammatory response and give you a big boost of energy, because while you're sleeping and you're doing the restorative regenerative cycles,
Hmm.
your body, especially right now, since you're kind of being biological for two, it could use the break.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for anybody who maybe isn't breastfeeding or, doing a lot of the same stuff I'm doing, but they are under an extreme amount of stress, maybe just, issues with their mitochondrial function, which is what happens when we are under an extreme amount of stress. How could C60 benefit them?
Yeah, well, C60 is great because it really does act literally right at the mitochondrial membrane. So
Mm.
that's the heart of how it really helps, is it upregulates your mitochondrial function. That's in fact why I've seen people go from, not having a menstrual cycle to having a
Mm.
menstrual cycle again, is because the boost in their mitochondrial function effectively kind of de-ages people. And you see that a lot with NMN. I've
Mm.
spoken with David Sinclair a bunch, and Dave said that he's had that happen with people as well, and I've seen it both
Mhm.
in people and in animals, and just from C60. So in the combination of those formulas, where they have both of them have NMN and resveratrol in a balanced formula, coupled with the C60, you really see some profound shifts. As a guy, one of the biggest shifts that I've noticed that's kind of strange when you couple those things together, is when your mitochondrial health goes up for whatever reason, and I'm not really sure what the rationale is. Testosterone levels go up too. So free
Ah.
testosterone, and I've literally seen in the span of 30 days, people's testosterone jump about 300 points, which
Oh,
is
okay.
a remarkable shift. I mean, as a guy, you feel it. I mean, as a
Oh,
woman,
yeah.
you definitely feel it too. But
Hmm.
really, from the standpoint of somebody who's an older guy, I'm in my 50s, so it's good for me. The other thing about knocking out oxidative stress while you're upregulating mitochondria is when you don't have all those oxidative factors going on and peroxides and radicals, you don't get gray, which is kind of nice. So
Ah,
yeah, well,
yeah.
because yeah, graying out is usually a function of oxidative stress on your cells,
Okay.
and yeah, and so
It's
it's
so
kind
funny
of,
that people say, "Oh, it's copper." But it's just overall oxidative stress, right?
well, I mean, think about, if you wanted to take hair and bleach it, what would you do? Peroxide.
Peroxide. Yeah,
Yeah, and your body creates peroxides all the time. So
got it.
it's the same sort of function. And I could be I don't anything biologically, you can't just say it's one definitive thing. I mean, we
Mm.
are a really super complex system. I mean, I can look at a body and say, "Oh, well, we can affect that, biologically with photonics. You can do
Hmm.
photobiomodulation, we can affect it
Hmm.
with magnetics, we can do PIMP therapies, we can affect it with stem cells, and we can do biochemical things." So we're so complicated. I'm sure there is a factor of selenium and copper and
Right.
dihydrotestosterone and conversions and all of that stuff, but yeah, at its root, I think there's really, I think it's just oxidation. At least that's my take, and
Yeah.
I think that could take some time, but I'm feeling pretty good. And all of this stuff really, makes a big difference because I guess what, 4 months ago, I was in a really
Oh
horrifically
yeah.
bad motorcycle wreck. And, I was able to rehab myself using all of these modalities very rapidly. My femur literally ended up inside of my tibia. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
oh my goodness.
yeah, it was not the most fun thing ever, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was, compared to what the prognosis was, the orthopedic surgeon said, well, we're going to have to put you under general anesthesia, and then we're going to have to rebuild your leg with pins and plates and screws, and put in bone filler and all sorts of stuff. And I, it was bizarre to me to hear that. It really was kind of like being rapidly faced with the barbarism of where we are in terms of the technology of medicine. I actually had myself discharged the next day and bought a hospital bed and set it up at my lab and rehabbed myself over the next few weeks. And I
Wow.
did it with stem cells, carbon 60, pulsed electromagnetic fields, lived with a quantum block next to me,
Mm.
and but made a remarkable recovery, right? I was told that, it would be 12 weeks before I could put any weight on my leg whatsoever. And I was up and back on it at like the 11-day mark. And then you're not yeah, well, not putting full weight on it by any
Right.
means, but
Not
I was up.
jogging, but
Yeah, I was not jogging, but by the 9-week mark, I had full clearance from my orthopedic surgeon. And he actually, I went in and I was still in a wheelchair, and he looked at my X-rays and said, "You're in the chair for me, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, kind of," because I had already been walking, so I just didn't want to get busted for it. So yeah, but
wow.
it was kind of, yeah. I mean, to be able to put weight on my leg and walk at 9 weeks was really good. And it's that's the thing, is I used all of the different modalities that I understand for a physical system, because it was, I think, probably the single biggest mover there was pulsed electromagnetic fields. I used one of the big
Mm,
coils from Pulse Centers,
okay.
and that was kind of a remarkable benefit. And you could see it literally after a week. I went in at the 7-day mark because my collarbone was just split in half, and then my femur had wedged inside of my tibia, and actually split my tibia down 6 inches, kind of like a log splitter. So it was a pretty brutal accident, and I face planted at 65 miles an hour, so that was less than thrilling. But
Yeah.
I went in a week later, and I asked to have X-rays of my shoulder because I could already move my arm. And the orthopedic surgeon said, "No, we don't need to do that. It's going to be at least 3 weeks, and you're only at a week, and there's no way there's any radiographic healing. You're not going to be able to see any bone or anything." And I said, "No, I'm reasonably certain," because I had been doing literally, multiple hours every day with a pulsed electromagnetic coil on my shoulder. And so, he said, "Well, we don't do that." And I said, "Look, I'd really like it." So he went ahead and let me do the X-rays, and then he came back about 10 minutes later with his iPad and said, "Do you see this? This is new bone." And there was, after a week, there was already new bone, and I guarantee it was because of the pulsed electromagnetic fields, because I know from multiple studies that people have done, and a lot of anecdotal data just from friends of mine that have done that, with bones that have been broken. My friend Todd Shipman, whom you're friends
Hmm.
with,
Yep.
Todd's daughter had broken a bone, and in the span of less than 2 weeks, had completely mended the bone with no trace of the fracture using PIMP therapies. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of data on that. And it's, yeah, I mean, if you look for it, it's out there. And so the combination of that, and I did 7 stem cell procedures in the first 6 weeks, where I extracted my own B cells and then would activate them photonically and cryogenically, and then re-inject them. And that made a big difference, I think. And that, coupled with the anti-inflammatory response from the carbon 60, all of those things stacked to basically accelerate the healing cycle. So, I mean, it's been, I think this week actually makes 16 weeks since the accident. And
Wow.
I'm out and about doing everything that I would normally do.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to just health of the mitochondria as well. And that's the biggest thing that I focus on when I'm helping people. And then just with myself also, is looking at how does this affect my mitochondria, and so many people are really into like the detoxes, the parasite cleanses, all these things. And I always say, if your mitochondria is not healthy, if you're not supporting your redox function, don't do those things because they could really, really cause issues for you. Would you say?
I completely agree. One of the new formulas that will be coming out within a couple of months has urolithin A in it, and
Mm,
the rationale behind that was to upregulate the healthy mitochondria, but to trigger mitophagy, so
mm.
that we could actually purge the mitochondria that are
Oh,
damaged and replace them. Yeah, so the PQQ stimulates mitochondrial biogenesis. So the new formulation will have the PQQ and the CoQ10, but also has urolithin A, so that it wipes out via triggering mitophagy, wipes out the damaged mitochondria, then pushes the body to make new mitochondria that are healthy to replace it. Because I really do, I agree with you. I think your cellular health, if you start at the root and you
mm.
cascade up with cellular health, then everything works more effectively.
Yep. And I've even seen it, my partner, Carrie Bennett, and I were doing a fertility course, and we've had out of our last cohort 4 pregnancies, and then of course there was my pregnancy from kind of doing a lot of these things that support mitochondrial health. And I think people get really hung up on the lab numbers, my LH is this and my FSH is this. And, we've seen just in understanding kind of the cellular hydration, a lot of Dr. Pollock's work, these hormones and these different systems kind of respond almost in this like resonance effect in the body, so that maybe you don't see it go up on a lab, but boom, you're pregnant or you feel better, and eventually it does show up on the lab. But I feel like this kind of resonant effect can happen in the body, kind of on the quantum scale before you actually see numbers on a lab. Do you ever see things like that happen?
Yeah, I do, and that's one of the things that we've been doing research on. Is you definitively see the effects on a subtle level before
Mhm.
they cascade up. That's why when you shift cellular energetics and you change mitochondrial health, it cascades up and starts to build up in a positive effect. And so you can see, like in the case of the athletes, like the CrossFit athletes, that's why you're seeing extra strength, right? Is
Mhm.
their ATP levels are higher, so they actually have the capacity to put out more power and force. There's also another function called super precipitation of skeletal muscle actomyosin, which is basically when you super precipitate something, you trigger a higher firing potential with the sarcomeres, which are the little muscle fibers. And so normally your brain downregulates your body's firing capacity to 25 to 30% of its actual capacity, like if you were having a fight or flight response and your life were in danger. But if you super precipitate it, carbon-60 allows the electrical potentiation to move across the fibers and fire more. So that's the other effect. But really,
Mm.
the biggest effect is just because you have more robust energetics in your mitochondria. And
Yeah.
also, the formulas that I've been making for the carbon-60, both the Olympic and the neural, because they have pyrroloquinoline quinone, you actually end up with more mitochondria at the end of the day. And the rationale for that was when you upregulate the energy potential too much, if you flow too many electrons across a membrane, you'll actually pop the mitochondria.
Mhm.
And you don't want that. So if you're trying to get a higher energy potential out, rather than just upregulate a set number, if you increase the number, you can distribute the load across them and end up with more mitochondria. There's some other substances that do the same thing. A couple of things that are PPAR agonist and some SARMs and things like that.
Mm.
Like GW 501 516 was a really great one. SR 9009 was another one. Those were kind of, I think, bypassed because there were some side effects with them that weren't so great. In the case of GW 501 516, which a lot of people think of as a SARM, but it's a partial peroxisome. It's a PPAR agonist. Um, that was it showing increased potential, athletic potential, muscular output of some ridiculous number like 70% or something.
Oh.
But yeah, cardarine, I think, was the other name. But the problem was it triggered cancerous growths. And there's
Mm.
actually a lot of people worry about NMN right now because an article came out talking about NMN triggering
I
tumors.
saw that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, and that's actually that's been known for quite a long time, because it's co-opting a certain gene. And anytime you're adding something that's cellular fuel, the things that want to have unregulated growth are of course going to grow. But it's very easy to block that if you just use there are probably about 56 different compounds that can do it, and quinolones are one of those. So if you put in PQQ while you're taking NMN, you've negated the potential for that. So it's kind of that's one of the other kind of peripheral reasons to have the PQQ in there, is not just to trigger mitochondrial biogenesis, but to actually block the detrimental effects of some of the rapid growth and proliferation of cells that are typically unchecked. So
Wow.
yeah,
Amazing.
whole lots of different little layers to all of these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we got to wrap pretty soon, but one more question I had for you. You mentioned that C60 was an electron donor. I thought it was just a supporter of the electron transport chain, but it's actually electron donor.
Yeah, it's a donor and acceptor. It will do
Okay.
both depending on its conditions, right? So and
Okay.
that's one of the things that makes it kind of interesting. So it's also, as much as it's a tremendous antioxidant, it's also a pro-oxidant. So
Mm.
if you're stimulating it with light, you can create just a huge pronounced pro-oxidative effect, and there's a lot of output, and that actually is kind of a detrimental thing in a lot of ways, because it triggers superoxide production. So it releases a thing called singlet oxygen. And so that's kind of the equivalent of intracellularly if you released a lot of peroxide. And so you can
Mm.
actually use it to lyse cell membranes and break down walls and things like that.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you have to be kind of careful. Like you don't want to hit it with specific frequencies of light, because under certain of emissive frequencies, it will rip things apart.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's
do you,
contraindicated for animals with internal lighting. So
oh,
I'm
interesting.
just,
Okay.
I'm just kidding. That's, yeah, my bioluminescence joke for the day. So,
Awesome. Well, you've got a lot of amazing stuff going on right now. You've got the water. When do you think that water is going to be out to market? I'm going to be trying it, but what do you think you're going to have that out
I'll
to
send you
market?
some so you can try it and just give me some
Okay.
feedback, probably within the month. I think what we'll do
Oh,
is we'll
cool.
probably release it for people that have subscriptions first, so we can get some feedback kind of from our tribe, and all the guys that are doing the wizard sciences stuff, because we have a pretty good group. There are a lot of folks that are doing it consistently, so I'd like to kind of get some feedback internally, and then make sure everything's dialed in and it's not too strong. Not and my concern is not that it's too weak, it's actually that it might be too strong. So I just like to
Interesting.
get some good feedback on that, and then we'll probably release it in the next maybe 2 months for everybody.
Awesome. And then the deuterium depleted water, maybe this fall at
Yeah, it
some
should
point.
should be in, yeah, I'd say like Q3 probably would be
Cool.
my guess. Maybe August or just a hair later.
Cool. We'll have to do another podcast then to talk
Yeah, that'd be
more
great.
about it for sure. Cause I've done a couple on deuterium depleted water and it's a fun topic to talk about. And so we'll definitely have to get together again and do that.
Okay, that sounds awesome. I look
Awesome.
forward to it.
Yeah. Well, this has been really great. And I'm going to make sure I put all the information in the show notes, Leela Q, the all Wizard Sciences link, all of that in case people want to check these things out. But thank you so much for being here today, Ian.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. It was great talking to you.
It's awesome.